Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Jean Werbie-Harris, the retired Executive Director for Community Development for the Village of Pleasant Prairie. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
What is your background in zoning and planning?
So maybe I'll begin with my education. So I went to the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater for my undergrad degree in geography, urban planning, and accounting related fields. And then a few years later, after I was in the working field, then I got my master's degree from University of Wisconsin-Parkside in public administration.
Okay. And how did you actually get into the working part of that field?
So back when I was in college and thereafter, I worked as a research assistant, and I did a number of internships with the Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, which I'll refer to as SewerPAC. And then I also did research and other cartographic internships at the university and with Walworth County. So I found a very genuine interest in working in planning and problem solving and working in communities. And so from that point on, I wanted to work at SewerPAC, who had hired me in 1983. And when I worked at SewerPAC, I worked basically in 3 different divisions over my tenure there. It was like 7 years. And I worked in community development, I worked in research and development, and then I worked in economic development.
Okay. And what does SewerPAC do?
So SewerPAC is the regional agency that's a recommending body, puts together many, many plans on engineering, transportation, and land use for the 7 counties of Southeast Wisconsin, of which Kenosha County is one of those counties.
Okay, and had you ever done any work with the county prior to becoming planning director at Pleasant Prairie?
Yes, actually I did. Back in 85, 86, Kenosha County wanted to apply for a housing grant from the federal government. So there needed to be a series of surveys and a grant written for that opportunity, and I was part of the team that did that up at the Regional Planning Commission. We were successful about 8 months later, and Kenosha County Executive Gil Dosmegan had hired me as a contract employee from SewerPAC to run the county's housing program, which involved really housing rehab and providing loans to low and moderate income individuals for rehabilitating or renovating their homes to make them safe and secure for residents.
How long did you do that?
I did that for about 2.5 years.
Okay. And then how did you come to be hired at Pleasant Prairie?
So the village of Pleasant Prairie was a township all the way up through spring of 1989. And they were going through a process between 85 and 89 and evaluating whether or not they wanted to become a village. It involved a lot of groundwork to be completed by the township between then and 1989. And during that time period, I was working as a planner and a senior planner and an economic development planner for the SewerPAC. And I would be one of those individuals that I just didn't want to work 8 to 5. I was always interested to find out what I could learn from all the other departments. And eventually the executive director, Kurt Bauer, and Phil Evenson, who was the assistant director, they took me under their wing, and I was mentored by both of them. And I learned about a lot of different facets of planning, not just land use, but all the different facets. And one of the things that had come across their desks is that the village of Pleasant Prairie, at that time the town, was looking to incorporate. As part of that incorporation, they were going to need to develop their own departments, their own planner, their own zoning administrator. They were going to basically have all those functions moved from the county over to the town and then the village of Pleasant Prairie. So I had been watching all of those things and reading about those things, and I had got my degree from Parkside in December of 1988. And as they were reviewing things with me and helping me along, they said, you know, there's going to be a planning director position opening. And I I said, "Do you think I can do that?" He said, "We know you can do that." And I was very excited because I had a lot of experience as a community resident planner at SewerPAC, where I worked in Cedarburg and Menominee Falls and Burlington. So I'd done quite a bit of that work, and I was doing economic development work, land use, census work. So there was a lot of generalized things that I was doing at SewerPAC. And for me personally, I wanted to come to a smaller town or village that was still, still not really in their growth period yet, but I could start at the floor level and work with the community, the town, the businesses, and grow that community.
Did they contact you, or did you just apply because there was an opening?
I believe that they had contacted SewerPAC to find out if there were any planners there that might be interested. And SewerPAC made me aware of it, and as soon as I was made aware of the position, I applied for the position.
Okay, and looking at the land use and what was in the town at the time they incorporated as to a village, what was Pleasant Prairie like?
So the town of Pleasant Prairie was more of a no growth or very slow growth position at that time. They had just under 12,000 people, but because they were a township, whenever they needed or wanted to develop, many of those areas of the community needed to annex into the city of Kenosha in order to get the municipal sewer and water services in order to develop. So as a result, it was very, very limited with respect to the growth of the township. Again, most of the residential were on private wells and septic systems, and the businesses and the industry and the commercial, that was very limited as well. So it was very critical that if this was the path that the community wanted to take, they needed to do a lot of work, and they did quite a bit between 85 and 89 before I got there in order to set the table to begin a growth scenario, become incorporated, become a village.
Okay, so you applied, went through the hiring process, and were there a lot of applicants? Did you just hit it off well with the people who were looking to hire a planner, or how did?
Well, I know that there were at least 3 or 4 that made that same application. I felt that there was a really good connection. The people who interviewed me were Mike Polikoff, who was the village administrator at that time. And then some of the others were Tom Turwall, who's deceased right now, but he was very influential in the entire growth of Pleasant Prairie. I spoke with Don Ruck at the time, and Roger Prang as well during that time for the interview.
And you were offered the job?
Yes, yes.
And as that position, what did you have to do first walking into the job?
So the offices were not set up for a professional planner on staff. Again, any planning that they had had up to that point was done by consultants that they had hired. So we needed to establish the office itself. I needed to get everything organized with respect to the process, the procedures, the checklist, just working on so many documents. There was the comprehensive plan. We had to work on that at the very beginning, and that was timed perfectly because we worked with Kenosha and Summers to put a comprehensive plan together. We started it about 1990, and it was finally adopted in 1996, so that was a critical component. We had to work on land use legislation. So we had to work on the zoning ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, which we refer to as the land division and development control, and just all these other various regulations, procedures, and documents. The situation is that many things carried over from when we were under county jurisdiction as a township, but then once we became a village, we adopted an ordinance and say, okay, we're going to carry these over until we can write our own. And I guess I just want to show you some of the things. One of the things that was very important for us to put together was the zoning ordinance. This actually includes zoning, land division, construction, site erosion control, many, many different ordinances, comprehensive plan as it refers to the development and land use legislation of the village. So we ended up taking what the county had and we ended up rewriting the entire thing. The most important things that we actually did first were the land division and development control.
So what was the land used for at the beginning, before you were hired?
So Fortunately for us, the city of Kenosha, as well as Southeast Wisconsin, were very active in planning as early as the 40s and the 50s. We actually adopted part of the Kenosha County planning and zoning, and that was done back in 1959. So there's some good history. Sewer PAC was started in 1962, and Kurt Bauer was the one that started it in 62, and he really focused on the planning for Southeast Wisconsin. Again, that includes the Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, Ozaukee, Washington, Walworth, and Waukesha counties. But in 1967, they did the first real land use plan for our area east of I-94, which was the Kenosha Urban Planning District document by Harlan Bartholomew and Sewer PAC. And that went from 67 until 1990, when we started to put together the next generation of the land use plan.
Who was Harlan Bartholomew?
He's a very famous, well-known planner, transportation system planner, consultant, dates back to the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s with respect to their firm and their team. They've done significant work all over the country, but in particular in the Milwaukee area as well.
Okay, so again, you take this position and you talk about coming up with land use and zoning ordinances, and you look at a map of the village at that time and you say, we're going to put this here or that there. How did you come across deciding that?
So a little bit of that was done for me with respect to the industry. That was very important. So again, I started to say between 1985 and 1990, and I came in 89, that's when the village administrator, the first town administrator, was hired. And he worked very closely with Tom Turwald, Don Rock, Roger Pring, and others. They knew that at some point they wanted to become a municipality. And a municipality is a political jurisdiction where your borders become firm, so that lands don't annex one way or another to an adjacent municipality. And they worked very hard between 85 and 1990 on cooperative plans and between the city of Kenosha and the water utility in the city of Kenosha and the village of Pleasant Prairie. We worked on plans with respect to identifying where appropriate land uses would go, but in particular, that was the same time that, remember, from 1974 to 1978, the power plant, the We Energies power plant, was constructed in the town of Pleasant Prairie. They had some wonderful ideas back then with respect to working with Dick Abdu from Wisconsin Energy and a number of key people like Wayne Kessel, who was on the county board and plan commission for over 50 years. And there were some really key points as to, if we become a village, we're going to need to make sure that we have industry and growth. And their creation of this industrial park was already in the plans and already in the works of what to do with respect to grow the community. With the power plant there, reliable source of inexpensive electricity, their plan was to create an industrial park. And again, part of that was triggered by what was going on in the city of Kenosha. Because remember, in the city of Kenosha in 87, 88, that's when the Chrysler plant was shutting down and people were being laid off. And economic development seemed very, not only nerve-wracking, but it was concerning by the forefathers in Kenosha, Pleasant Prairie, Summers, that, you know, we needed places for people to work.
So could you just establish this industrial park around the power plant, or what did it take to go, all right, we can actually create this park? We have to talk to who? We have to talk to them? We have to get this done?
So a big part of it was creating public-private partnerships. And that was very critical between Pleasant Prairie and Wisconsin Energy, between Pleasant Prairie and the various environmental agencies that were involved in the process. The intent initially was to put this industrial park in the center of the village, by the railroad tracks, by the We Energies power plant. But the key is that we needed to be able to get to it. And so one of the other big pieces to this whole land use concept of putting industrial here was to bring traffic from the interstate. There was no direct access to from the interstate into the village of Pleasant Prairie Center, but for at Highway 50, and so and Highway C. And so there was considerable discussion about bringing Highway Q, now 165, from the interstate all the way to the center of this industrial park. So again, a lot of people were involved with respect to planning so many different things. The village incorporation needed to happen in order for us to do everything that we did with respect to being a municipality that had the ability to develop with using state economic development tools like tax increment financing. We needed to be able to apply for certain grants and other ways of financing to help bring Highway 165 from the interstate to Highway H and eventually all the way to Highway 31. Other things that were going on is existing Highway 31. Remember, that was just a very narrow 2-lane road back all the way through the 80s. And part of that decision making, again, to develop a land use plan, you need transportation, you need infrastructure. So that we had worked with Sewer PAC as well as Kenosha County in order to widen Highway 31 to 6 lanes. So when I say we're setting the table, they started a lot of that work and they needed me working with Mike Polikoff and engineers that were consultants at the time and others to put all of these things together in order for us to create an opportunity for economic growth and growth for the community. So land use, transportation, the industry by the corporate park, all of those things needed to all come into play at the same time.
Did you need any special state legislation to do any of this?
There was. The special state legislation was for the creation of Pleasant Prairie to become a village. We obviously needed to get permission from the adjacent city, which was the city of Kenosha, but there was special legislation that was drafted that allowed, based on the economic status of the county in that area, to allow Pleasant Prairie to incorporate. There still needed to be a vote of the residents, and then as part of that vote, there was also a carving out of some of our border areas that in order for the city to agree, we needed to transfer about 1,500 acres to the city of Kenosha. So there were a number of things that needed to be evaluated and put together. We had a great law firm, Quarles and Brady, out of Milwaukee, that helped to strategize and put all of these pieces together. So while someone was working on this piece, there was somebody working on another piece. There was really a lot of brain power and a lot of great individuals and a lot of partnerships that had been put together. Because even with that incorporation, bridging, a major wetland in the community, the EPA was involved, in Wisconsin DNR and FEMA. There were so many state, local, county, federal agencies that were involved in this process in order for it to happen. And the state was wonderful with us. And again, roads are expensive. And so we worked with Kenosha County quite a bit. We worked with the state. And when our creation of the tax increment finance or TIF districts were completed, that helped to fund a lot of those public improvements.
And what were some of the other infrastructure issues that the town becoming a village faced?
And one of the other major concerns was municipal sanitary and sewer and water needed to be brought out to the corporate park, needed to be brought out to our large commercial development that we had underway at that same time, which was Premium Outlets. So it was very critical that we had municipal services. We knew we couldn't develop an industrial park or any other development without having the municipal services. And it was just because the private wells, the septic systems, none of that would have been able to withhold or stand the capacity. But the other thing that was tied to that is that Pleasant Prairie had a lot of radium in our groundwater, which caused a lot of problems, not only for drinking water, but for just having a good, clean source of water. And so we needed to work with the Kenosha Water Utility. We worked with Sewer PAC. Eventually, we had to work with the governors of the Great Lakes states, as well as individuals in Canada as well, the provinces of Canada, in order to get a Great Lakes water diversion.
Okay, tell me about that.
So,
why Canada is an issue for...
Well, the Great Lakes border both the United States and Canada. So they have the same rights, these water rights, as the United States. And so it was so very, very significant because there were two major basins, the Lake Michigan Basin and the Mississippi Basin. where all the water, once it's used, kind of drains back to those basins. So right through the middle of Pleasant Prairie runs the subcontinental divide, literally the subcontinent divide. And so everything, every drop of water that is expended on this side goes this way, and everything over here goes that way. Well, the reliable source of water that we needed in order to, service not only the industrial park, but the residents of the community was a diversion that allowed Lake Michigan water to go from Lake Michigan over the subcontinental divide and then brought back. So we were crossing the subcontinental divide with water. And that was a subject of a lot of controversy at first, but I actually have a book that I had put together about Pleasant Prairie and about Mike Polikoff, and it was pretty significant because if we didn't do that, we never would have been able to develop in Pleasant Prairie because of the very poor water that we had in the community and working. And eventually, even though they didn't want it right away, this is the same pipelines that we put in, massive pipelines and everything that we ran all the way to the interstate, and is now in our lifetime, the last 5 to 8 years, has been brought over to the village of Bristol. So is now serving their industrial park as well as our industrial parks west of the interstate, as well as what's in Pleasant Prairie.
And that water is going back
to Lake Michigan.
Crossed into Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds to me like there were some people in the town at that time who were kind of visionary as to what was going on. Who were these people in the town?
So we had quite a few visionaries. I would have to say that a lot of them really started to stand out between 1985 and 1990. Some of the visionaries included Tom Turwall, who served as the chairman of the board as well as village president and also chairman of the Plan Commission. Mike Polikoff, who was the village administrator, again, came in from Colorado, worked in Oklahoma, and then he moved to Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, first administrator. He was one of our visionaries. Mike Serpy, who served on multiple boards, from Parks to Plan Commission to Village Board, he was a great visionary. John Steinbrink was one of the great visionaries that we had as well. Let me think. Don Ruck, Roger Prang, Ed Kaufman, Monica Uhas, Skip Gerard. I mean, there were so many. And what was really unique to Pleasant Prairie and attracted me, one of the things that attracted me to Pleasant Prairie was that not only were they visionaries, but they had very common goals. They could see the big picture, as Mike or I would explain to them, and the big goal of what we were trying to achieve, not only just to help Pleasant Prairie, but the whole Kenosha County area, was we needed to take all these deliberate steps in order to make that happen. And it was amazing that, everything was explained very clearly, it was presented very clearly, and they all understood why we were doing it. And it was not to grow uncontrollably, but to grow very deliberately and to grow at a speed that would work for the development that was coming. So if I could just explain that real quick, is that you can't grow so fast that your infrastructure is not there or is not constructed. Whether it's sewer or water, it's roadway infrastructure and the widening of roadways, and tied to that is land use planning. So while we had completed this comprehensive plan, we'd been working on it from about 1990 to 96. Our portion of it with respect to how we wanted to see things develop, we pretty much had a lot of things mapped out by 1990, 91, 92. We knew what land uses we wanted to put where, how we could get municipal infrastructure out to those particular areas, and that helped to set the framework as to where we would develop first, second, third. We didn't want to leapfrog that development. That didn't make any sense, and it would be too costly for the infrastructure.
And the people you mentioned pretty much had the same vision. It wasn't
Same
like
vision.
Competing aspects to it.
They understood the greater goal. The board members all serve at large in Pleasant Prairie. So it's not like they have one specific aldermanic district. It's a village board, and they all serve and they represent all of the individuals. And so it was very important that the village was created that way so that everybody would understand that this is for the greater good as we continue to move forward.
And you mentioned that by 1990, the village now had a pretty good sense of where things were going to go. So you're telling me in 1990, you've got the power plant constructing this industrial park, and you say, oh, all right, we're going to have to build homes somewhere. We're going to have commercial somewhere. Back in 1990, this group, you and Mike Polikoff, said,
and plan commissioners, yep.
This is where we want to put the houses.
So that sounds very simple, but it really wasn't. And then I was starting to grow some of my staff by that point. I had one planner in particular, Peggy Herrick, and she was with me for over 30 years, 31 years. So the key for us is when new hires came in that they were visionaries as well, and they could see the big picture, not just one little corner of the village. So as we started to plan and look at the village, we wanted to make sure that, number one, they had municipal sewer and water. So it made sense that some of those areas that were in proximity around the periphery on the edges of the village, those would be the first to develop with residential. And then other areas of the village that had pockets of subdivisions, well, we were bringing massive twin lines down and large pipes from the city's basically water treatment facility down 7th Avenue, down 165. And then as we were going down 165, any subdivisions that were on either side, we would host a series of public assessment hearings, and we'd be bringing water and sewer up and down. So it started to make some sense that first we had to get some assistance to the residents as we were bringing those services out, because a lot of them had failing septic systems or wells. And then we also needed to get those services out to the corporate park. I think what's important to note is that our first goal was to develop the industry and the Lakeview Corporate Park east and west. East first, then west. That was the first critical element, and so we needed to make sure 165, at that time Q, 31, 95th Street, which was at the time County Trunk Highway T, H. So all of the main infrastructure had to be designed, installed, and that was part of the TIF district. We used those funds and those bonds that we issued to help pay for a lot of that infrastructure for the corporate park. Again, once that main industry had been laid out on these generalized plans, then we continued to look to see where residential would be most likely to occur, where's the best place to occur. We don't have pyramiding zoning in Pleasant Prairie, so we specifically identified single family ideally should go here. Multifamily could go here, two-family here, condos here. So based on all the land use planning and the neighborhood planning that I did at Sewer Pack, we decided that the best way, and I was very, very motivated on this point, is that we needed to adopt Sewer Pack's method of neighborhood planning, which meant that the comprehensive plan, and here's just our comprehensive plan for 2035, which showed a big map with lots of colors on it. The colors are gray for industrial, red for commercial, and then brown, orange, yellow, those were more of the residential, green for conservancy land. So there were a lot of very common sense things that we did, and we knew where the conservancy areas were in Carroll Beach and Des Plaines. We knew where we wanted the industrial to go. And then commercial needed to not be stripped along, but in major complex areas along major highways. And so residential, we kind of helped to fill in the gaps. But in order to understand exactly how things could develop, we started neighborhood planning. That's that next level of planning where it would do a complete of about 1.5 miles area that's usually bounded by major highways or roads or rivers. And we laid out where it would be best to put the residential and how that would incorporate into and have access to commercial. So these neighborhood plans, they show us lot layouts, wrote very high level, nothing surveyed. Road layouts, lot layouts, where infrastructure could come in, where the parks would be located, where community facilities and services needed to be located, where potential neighborhood schools would be placed. So there's a number of criteria that we would look at when we laid out a neighborhood plan.
It sounds as if some of the subdivisions that have been going up in Pleasant Prairie in the last 5 years, 10 years, were actually plotted back in 1992 or 4.
Well, they weren't platted at that point, but the high level, again, still neighborhood is still a higher level of planning. We had identified, like on this plan, that we wanted this area to be residential. It made the most sense. We could identify it was in proximity to neighborhood schools and parks. So we kind of planned one area, neighborhood at a time. How many neighborhoods do we have? 29. Are every single one of them planned out? Well, I can tell you that many of them are, but fast forward 20, 30 years, we had to go back and start taking a look at them again. So about 2 years ago, we worked with our IT department and we worked with our GIS department and engineering, and we brought many more professionals into it. And we did one massive map of the village because we needed to make sure roads didn't do this, but they connected. Where the police station was going to be, where the additional fire stations should be, where additional expanding commercial should be. So we laid it all out, and we had the group grew with respect to everyone's expertise of where it would be best to locate these different things. I have to say this, that Pleasant Prairie has a comprehensive plan. Ours didn't just sit on the shelf. We used it. And did we amend it? Yes. When there was a very good reason to amend it based on a proposal that came to us, and if it made good sense to do it, then we reevaluated, and oftentimes we would have to amend the comprehensive plan. We didn't do it very often, but when we did it very deliberately. We wanted people to be aware of what we were doing and why we were doing. And we sent out so many notifications. Whenever we do anything, we have mailed notifications. Now there's emailed notifications, and it's on websites and postings. And so we always wanted the community to know what we were doing, where we were doing it.
So when you started, and you're in the process of doing these ordinances and this planning, you didn't have the tools then that there are today. So how did you go to work in the morning and the phone rings and somebody wants to talk, and you're going to say, well, somebody give me a note on this because I can't get back to them. How did it work?
So what I can say is that we had just gotten some computers back in 1989 with the floppy disks, because we were using those to help write our ordinances and things, but the technology was not there. So everything we did was with paper maps. When we became a village, the county gave us all these paper maps, and we had them on big metal slide rules, and we'd slide them into compartments. We had so many of these flat map file drawers. So I had wetland maps, and each one had maybe 4 townships, so maybe 4 square miles per map, and we're 34 square miles. So we had drawers and drawers of wetlands and primary environmental corridors and zoning maps and floodplain maps. And so every time we met with someone at the counter, we'd ask them, where are you looking? And then we'd have to go and pull all these maps out of the drawers and bring all these maps up and put them on the front counter. It was a lot more work. And I have to say, at that time, we did not have the Kenosha County Interactive Mapping website, which is amazing. It brought everything light years ahead, because even residents, developers, everyone has access to that information now. And everything that we had, property record cards, we had to go file it. We had so much filing. We have a lot of filing at the Village Hall. It has not been scanned yet, but we had to go to the property file. Property record file is the file like on your individual property or a business property. Everything is filed by tax parcel number. I think we have, I don't know, maybe 10,000 property file records, maybe more by this point. And we'd have to pull them out of this high density. We'd open it up, it was a process. It was a terribly long process. So yeah, I would say for most of the first 10, 15, 20, 25 years, yeah, there was a lot of late nights, a lot of night meetings, a lot of time, because couldn't get it in on a 40-hour work week. We were working, I was 60, 70 hours, and many of my staff were too, especially when getting some of these ordinances written. And we had to make sure that everything got done before we could get things through the process. And so it's an amazing story now when I think about it. And going to get some lunch, coming back, and there's 15 more notes. There was no email at that time, so everyone's answering the phone and writing down little notes, and they're trying to figure out exactly what was going on. And it was it's an amazing journey now that I think about it. It's
okay. So you begin with industrial. Mm-hmm. You move on to residential.
Correct.
And the third leg or
third leg of land use really usually happens to be commercial, because the industry brings all the jobs. Then in order to keep bringing people to your community, we need to create housing. And we did it all different steps and all different levels of housing to bring people so that they could work at the jobs. So residential is your next level. And then once the residents are there, then we need to start looking at commercial, because they need services. They need schools, they need churches, they need commercial and business development. So we needed to start looking at those types of land uses as well in order to round out the community. I've said it from the very beginning, we needed to create a balanced community. If you would ask any member of the Plan Commission, a balanced community was critical. It couldn't all be industrial. It certainly can't be all residential or commercial. It needed to be a balance of the two. In fact, there aren't many communities in the state of Wisconsin of the balance we do. We have about, I think, 51% that's more industrial, commercial, and like 49% or so is residential.
Is that in land use, or is that in taxes paid, or is
well, and it works both, because it's land use to begin with. And when you've got 50-50, everyone is working off that same mill rate that comes to the village, and ours is one of the lowest for a full-service community in the state, and they're paying at a certain rate. Well, you know what? Over time, because their buildings are valued so much higher, the industry, the business, we don't have equipment anymore that can be counted, but there's such high values, that helps to offset the costs to the residents. So when everything is evaluated and we put everything together, that's why our mill rate is lower in Pleasant Prairie, because we've got so many different groups that are helping to pay into it. Industry certainly pays the highest amount into it because they have the highest assessed values.
Okay, so we are talking about commercial development. Mm-hmm. That means department stores, grocery stores, other such stores that provide items for purchase. Mm-hmm. Do you say, well, this is where commercial is going to go, and then some company comes in and says, I'm going to build there then. Since this is going to be commercial, I'm going to go there. Is that how it works?
So because we had a lot of vacant land throughout the village, and the commercial we had was very little, scattered along some of our major highways, South Sheridan Road, or Highway 50, or Highway 31 at the north end, we really needed to make sure that where we put the commercial development, that it was very well planned out. We did, in Pleasant Prairie, I didn't really want a lot of, residential, commercial, industrial. We try to group our land uses because obviously certain uses have different impacts, whether it's lighting, noise, signage. So we wanted to make sure that they were well laid out. We were blessed. We were so thankful that along Highway 50, we had a developer called VK Development. And his name was VK, Vincent Contemporary. He had come down and he was looking in this area. So a developer up in the Brookfield area. And he had come down to the area and he drove Highway 50, and he was quite a visionary himself. He saw that 450 acres between 88th Avenue and 104th Avenue, south of Highway 50 to like almost Highway C. He said, I would like to do a development there. And he came in and met with me. And I said, well, what are you thinking about? He said, I want to do more of a planned development where we could have residential, but with a continuum of care. All and that meant that there could be some daycares that would be put into that area. There'll be single family homes. There would be some condominiums. There would be some multifamily. There would be senior housing. There would be assisted living, and there would be nursing home. So he had this great vision for that, and that was amazing. And we shared that vision. And I said, what else? And then can we divide that from something else that wants to have that visibility, that location along Highway 50. Absolutely. He goes, I want to put commercial up there. And that's going to be between 50 and 125 acres of commercial. And he had built up a relationship with the hospital, now St. Catherine's, but it was KMH and St. Catherine's. And then St. Catherine's decided to build out there. So we strategically wanted to place everything in such a location based on their impact to that area, and where regular commercial could go, retail commercial could go, where more of the office commercial could go. And so we laid out a series of plans. We're a new Catholic church. I'm most proud of that because I was contacted by VK in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee back in 93, 94. And they approached me and said, we'd like to build the first Catholic church in the Archdiocese in the last 20, 30 years. And I said, that would be wonderful. Let's do it in Pleasant Prairie. And so I actually became a trustee eventually of St. Anne, but it was VK that really had that vision that he wanted to put a Catholic church there. So we could kind of start to see how, based on the land uses and the main east-west mile-long road in between, that we could put the commercial at one location, hospital can still consider it as commercial, and then we divide some of that. We'd have a little bit of residential. Then we start doing our institutional uses. We already had a school, which is Pleasant Prairie Elementary School. Put the church next to that. Put a couple of, a daycare next to that. The school, all of a sudden everything just started to fit into place. And it wasn't just like it came to us. We just started working and laying things out and moving things around, and we put it all together. And then once everyone knew what types of land uses we were looking at, we have 2 veterinary clinics, one on either end of this development, but right just north of the residential, because single family and residential, they have a lot of pets, and so that was a great location for both of those. And so it was a big, long process, but it was amazing. And there were so many people that we worked with. We had a great staff, great set of department heads. That was one thing I want to highlight for you, is that at the beginning, because we were much smaller, is that when we would get a concept or an idea brought into us, I'd gather all the department heads and Peggy and some of the other key staff and say, let's look at this. What do you think about this? How will this work? How will this impact your departments? So we would go through everything and we kind of worked through it. Again, everything was in paper. So every time someone brought in a set of plans and it was 100 pages, large, we get these rolls and rolls. There were like anywhere between 7 and 10 that we distribute to each department, because originally it was one and that wouldn't work because then they could sit on desks. So that was an amazing thing. We kind of figured out, let's get everyone the plans at the same time so we can be more diligent and we can review them in a more timely manner than having them sit. And over the years, we've just had such amazing police chiefs, 4 fire chiefs, 2 police chiefs I've known, 3 police chiefs. Engineering. There's just been so many great people that we've put projects together and built relationships with in our community. It's been amazing.
So what were the first companies that actually came into the industrial park, and then how has the industrial park grown to how many number of businesses, industries may be there for the jobs that have been created? This has obviously grown for almost 40 some years.
So the very first business, obviously, in the park was the power plant, and the hundreds and hundreds of construction workers and such, and the people that worked at the power plant. So then we build this massive industrial park with We Energies and with Wisp Park. Key people there, Jerry Franke, and Jerry Franke, Todd Rizzo, Lance Scala. There were some very key, Chad Novice, very key people that are still in the industrial world today in different companies that were part of the marketing of that industrial park. So once we kind of had that team together, oh, I lost my thought. Where are we going?
We're talking about how the corporate park
started
to grow from the first companies that were in it.
So our very first 2 companies were Rust-Oleum and Manutronics. And Manutronics was basically one of those grown out of a garage. That was Roger Mayer, very strong supporter of the village and Rust-Oleum. And again, working with Wispark, who was the marketing arm to all of this, and they had a staff of 5 or 6 or 7 people that they would be constantly marketing. So as a village, we didn't have to market the industrial park, we just had to do our part, and that was working with them in order to extend the infrastructure and work with them to develop the pad sites and things like that to grow the community. Some of our other early ones were Super Value, which is now Meyer. Let's see. Calumet Diversified Meats was another early one. Railroad Pacific was there for a very long time. Some of the others that started to come a little bit later, Fair Oaks Farms started to come. Just listing them, it's easier if I go around the corporate park, but Fair Oaks Farms and Good Foods and LMI Packaging and Uline on several buildings in the corporate park. Then Yamaha and the refrigeration, MFI, Midwest Refrigeration, Rank Video. We had, I said Railroad Pacific, then Newcon, NOSCO. I mean, there were so many. Pepsi, then Snap-on came back in, and then Sanmina, Manutronics turned into Sanmina. I mean, there were so many, and they continue to come. And Jelly Belly, obviously, was one of our really fun early tenants in the corporate park. They ended up leaving 4 or 5 years ago. Then that's when we brought in, but that's west, and that would have been Haribo and some of the later tenants, but they're in the Western Industrial Park known as Prairie Highlands. But it was great working with all the tenants. We had quarterly meetings with the tenants that we gathered just to make sure everyone was kind of satisfied, their concerns were heard, things like that. And the development arm that was totally one of the key reasons for our success as well was CABA, the Kenosha Area Business Alliance. They were called something before that, but when it really was becoming significant to us was when it was CABA in the early 2000s.
Right. So how many companies are in that park today?
I would think that we have about 105 in that park, not including Premium Outlets, because that came actually in 1988 as Lakeside Marketplace, and then sold Prime Outlets, and then the name changed again to Premium Outlets. And they have almost 100 stores there. And that's actually in the Lakeview West area. So the Lakeview West area it's where Quick Trip is today. It's where we have 2 hotels that were put in at that location. It was the Wispark office building. And so that was more of a commercial area in the Lakeview West area.
So how many jobs have been created in that industrial park? You talked about Chrysler was winding down back in '88, so obviously there were people who were going to be looking for work, and the industrial park was supposed to help find jobs for these people who no longer had Chrysler jobs. And
it did. And the original plan, as we laid it out, is that there would be 10,000 jobs in Lakeview East and West. Again, it started at about 1,200 acres, and then it morphed into about 2,000 acres because it included everything Lakeview East and then coming over the bridge over to Lakeview West. So right now, and I wish I knew the exact number, what I can tell you is that between Prairie Ridge, which is a very large, over 400-acre development, as well as the Lakeview Corporate Park area and our other industrial parks, right now we're at about 18,000 employees. And our population is right around 23,000. So we still export a lot of people that go to their jobs in Milwaukee, Chicago, Kenosha, various areas, but there are many, many, many more that come in. So a daytime population of between 30 and 35,000 is not unusual for us, just because we bring in a lot of people to these jobs and all levels of jobs. And that has consistently morphed over the years. So while we started with a business, for example, south of 165, and eventually that business left, then a similar type business, Monte Acrisol, went right back into that building. And when we had other buildings that I remember the Valenti brothers built, and now EMCO is moving into those. And so we don't have many vacant buildings in Pleasant Prairie. because they get well marketed by their teams and the brokers, and we seem to get people right back into them, which is continued job creation. Ta Chen was another business I was thinking, because they're in like 2 or 3 buildings. But as Wispark was stepping down, Centerpoint Properties, Zilber Properties, there are other broker type industrial marketing firms that helped to come in and help continue what we were doing.
You talk about the village being very deliberative.
Yep.
When a company or a grocery store or some department store or a neighborhood development approaches the planning and says, I want to put a grocery store right here, and I want it to be open all day and all night, and then did the village already have something in their head saying, you're not going to fit there? Was that ever the case?
Yes, and it's happened many times. And part of it is that the village board and plan commission and the administrator tasked me with the job of making sure that any new development that comes into the village, that it's the right development for Pleasant Prairie. We didn't want to compromise our goals. We didn't want to compromise our land use plan. We didn't want to compromise our zoning ordinance. So there are a number of things that were happening in the village over the years, but one of the things that we wanted to really focus on is we wanted to make sure that the land use was right, and it didn't compromise the adjacent residential or other land uses. We wanted to make sure that we could serve it. We wanted to make sure that, and one of the policies that we had adopted and put into our codes is that we really weren't supporting 24-hour businesses. So every community is different. We have some exceptions, obviously, police stations, fire stations, hotels, gas stations on the interstate. So there was a point in time by mid-1995, 96, where we decided that, 24-hour businesses are very difficult to manage for a police force and for a community, and sometimes not always the best things happen during the middle of the night. And so we really wanted to focus on businesses that weren't open round the clock so that we could service them and they would be available for our residents and our businesses. And there was a grocery store that had come in particular, I'm thinking of, that wanted a 24-hour, there were 2 different businesses that wanted 24-hour uses. And it was just not something that we felt that would be appropriate for our community. And I explained that to both of them. And I remember explaining that, no, I'm not kidding you. I mean, we really want to make sure that we stick to our guns, and we've told others no, and we want to make sure that the uses are right for our community. And they didn't believe me, and so I needed to gather a couple of board members up and a plan commissioner or 2, and they asked the question, and they basically said, no, what she's saying is right. There are certain policies that we've adopted as a village, and we want to hold true to those to protect the existing residents, to protect our services that we provide, to protect our tax base, just all these different reasons. And those uses ended up going someplace else, which is fine. They were good businesses. Their model just wasn't going to fit our community at the time.
Okay. So we go back to the years from when you started to this deliberative, careful planning process. When did you get a sense that this is going to work out? This is just fine. The people are in place who have a common vision. They want to be careful. I'm going to be part of this, and I just know this is going to be working out just fine.
Honestly, I think it was right after one of my first board meetings. So that would have been in June of 1989.
You already knew at that time?
I knew, yep. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, and I knew it was going to be a lot of work, and I knew that there would need to be a lot of consensus building and a lot of explanation, because we had a town of 12,000 people, and some of them got on board right away, and others were like, we're not so sure about this. We don't want to eliminate the Pleasant in Pleasant Prairie. And so they were very concerned about that. And they needed to get their questions answered, and they needed to have things explained to them. And so myself, my staff, the board members, we held true to what we believed, and we did a lot of meetings during the day, meetings at night, meetings on the weekend. We were meeting with people all the time, trying to help them understand that, once we start, we're going to keep going. And when I say deliberate planning and growth, I mean, we didn't take development just at any cost. We didn't want it to be at a cost of the existing residents. We didn't want it to be at the cost of the taxpayers or the new people coming in. We wanted to make sure that it was going to work and we could service it, and it wasn't going to overly burden what we were doing. So that was very, very important. So it was a very collaborative process, and I want to say everybody really wanted to make this work, and they wanted to, and I'll say this a couple of times probably, is everyone wanted to create our own identity. We wanted to make sure that everyone knew that they were in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. And that was a big push between 96, 97, 98, with us working with, at that time, Congressman Les Aspin, in order to get our own zip code in Pleasant Prairie that extended through a large part of the village. That was very, very important because, before that we were writing another community's name, but I always wanted to say that we lived in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, and what that meant. And so I like to think we were setting a standard. And we could have set that standard anywhere, but in my mind, I set a standard a certain place. And each time someone developed, we should try to do better. We want it to be more sustainable in the future. We want to be a good attraction and have desirable housing for people to come to. We wanted to make sure that they were good paying jobs that people would want to move to the community or come to the community to work at. Those are all critical pieces of the puzzle. At the time when we were growing much more rapidly, we were working with Kenosha Unified all the time. From the 1990s to 2010, we met with them quarterly. We're working on this development. We've done this comprehensive plan, this neighborhood plan. Now they're bringing in concept plans for a subdivision here, one here. And so we were constantly wanting to bring that to them, which is why for so many years we had portable classrooms and we have expansions, new school being built and things like that. So it was important that all aspects be looked at all the time. And all of us that were doing, the charging going forward, we wanted to make sure that everything was right and in its place. I mean, I live in this community. I've been a part of the community from a nonprofit standpoint and a village standpoint. And for me, I'm living here. I'm seeing it every day. I see it on the weekends. I see it at church. I see it at soccer practice. I see what's going on, and people don't hesitate to talk to me and give me input on what's happening. And have you thought about this? Can you bring in a use like this? And they'd email me. Later it was emails other than postcards, but people would tell me all the time, what else can we do to grow our community? And that call was answered. Really, I want to say in 1995 is when we started that process. And that was when we decided to convert the big lake, which was right in the middle of the corporate park, which we named Lake Andrea, and we wanted to bring in recreation. That's really that last piece of the puzzle is recreation. The administrator was originally from Colorado, and he said they had rec centers everywhere. And I said, what's a rec center? And the only thing we were familiar with was like the YMCA downtown. He goes, no, these are huge facilities with swimming pools and basketball courts. And I remember when we toured to look at all these, and he said, I think people need these things, and we need to build them. And so we were all like, okay, if we build them, we hope they'll come. And they did. And I think that there's studies and evaluations and everything that we did to make sure it made some sense. And I think right now the Recplex has between 13,000, 14,000 members. But when we opened it in 2000, we were a little nervous, but there was just overwhelming support by the local community. And then we found out how many people really wanted to ice skate, how many people really wanted to bring their kids to a splash pad and a pool, how many wanted a running track. They wanted to do things inside. Our weather's not always conducive to outside recreation. And so, and it was done in 3 phases. Really, the first phase was the main part of the Recplex. Then the ice came next, a couple years later. And then after that, then it was the aquatic center, and that's for swim meets and things like that. And we attract people from the region and across the United States, depending on what's going on. And it's amazing. And so we are so fortunate that that was the village administrator's vision, and then we just help carry that out.
Where is Pleasant Prairie today?
Where is Pleasant Prairie today? We have lots and lots of great opportunities moving forward. Again, one of some of the most recent things that we did was to develop the Prairie Highlands Corporate Park in 2018, 2019. That is where the Haribo's first manufacturing facility in North America is located, and they've got up to 4 phases planned out there. It's very exciting. Uline has just agreed and is well underway with the expansion of their H4, Headquarters 4, with respect to very large industrial building there, or office building there. And then Aurora always wanted to build a much larger facility, so they've built their first phase, which more is the office building and such in Prairie Highlands. But there's vacant land still there for other types of land uses. And when I left, the staff was still working with various companies. Nexus, who we had brought, was sold to Eli Lilly, and they're doing expansion there, and they're doing a bigger, even bigger, better expansion adjacent to that in Bristol. And so the key is just to always be looking for opportunities, working with our economic development partners like CABA, like Kenosha County, Milwaukee 7, WEDC. We all have been very collaborative with respect to working with each other and attracting new industry. And there's still quite a bit of land left there to do some additional industry. On the flip side of the interstate, south of 165, the village just approved Inspire development, which is a multifamily development. It's kind of all next to and behind Premium Outlets, about 700 units right there. They're market rate housing, but they will be very beautiful. And I worked with them initially before I left and retired, but they've got the apartments, they've got 2 clubhouses, they've got pickleball courts, they've got, their indoor facilities, they have swimming pools, they have so many wonderful amenities, because that's what's driving us now today, is that a lot of the people that are in the workforce, if they're not in a home or some type of condo or something to that effect, they want to be in these apartments that have all of these amenities. And so that project is going to be moving forward right there. 2 other single-family projects, which took a long time. I worked a lot of time on these to get them, and they just got their final plats approved. One is Cedar Ridge. It's I want to say it's like 78 single-family homes on the south central part of the village, single family. A little bit larger lots, a little bit more expensive. And then the other big development that's almost right in the middle of the village, between Highway 31 and 39th Avenue. It's called the Highland Estates. Very excited about that. I know it was a hard sell to many of the residents at first, but again, it's like that master planning of that 300-400 acres. And it'll take anywhere from 10 to 20 years for it to be developed. But we've got single family at this level, single family here, single family a little bit larger over here, a little bit larger here, condominiums here. So it's a great opportunity. In speaking with the developer last week, I think he said half to 2/3 of the initial lots of his first phase are already committed and reserved. Great opportunity. There's a couple of parks in that area. Now everywhere throughout here is going to have sidewalks. And so I think it's a great opportunity for people who want to grow and move to Pleasant Prairie, or maybe want to downsize in Pleasant Prairie. This will be a great opportunity. The home sizes will be varied. I would say that they probably will be anywhere from 1,400 square feet, and I think the largest is 3,000. But what we're seeing, because of the need for housing in the community, that there might be quite a few that want to build between that 1,400 and 2,000. We're seeing that a lot of the younger generations don't want these big McMansions, if you want to call them. They don't want 5 bedrooms. They don't want these massive yards. They don't want to be taking care of all that. They want to be able to be outside and enjoy the environment. That is a great development. Very excited about that. And I think that's both of those. Well, one, Cedar Ridge started, and Highland Estates is going to be breaking ground this spring, so their first phase. So very excited about some really good projects. There's always that downtown that I wished I could have put together over the years, but the timing was just never right.
So, when we began, we said you were retired, but I'm hearing that you're not all the way out of working with Pleasant Prairie.
No, it's hard to cut something off after it's been your life for over 35 years. I'll remain as part of the community, living here, and some of my other passions are, and they were passions when I was working at Pleasant Prairie, is I've always been a part of working for nonprofit groups, whether it is the Pleasant Prairie Historical Society that we created in 2010, and then we essentially got a building donated to us, and then we had done work with 500 volunteers and people in the community to help us renovate the Dublin School, and it is now a beautiful Pleasant Prairie small history museum because it's about 5,000 square feet, and it's being used a lot more now than it ever was before for people to come and have activities and fun classes and to see the museum. We have a full-time museum curator there, so it's very near and dear to my heart because I know the history of Pleasant Prairie. I know where we were. I studied that when I came and where we came from over the last 35 years. And one of the main reasons I think for that museum, and this was sponsored by the Riley family, specifically the parents of the current Rileys, is that, and they're continuing it, is that we need to learn from our past and we need to educate people about where we came from and how we're moving forward. And going to that museum, everyone's going to see things and hear things and understand things. And I think that's very important going forward and to be part of that. I'm involved in a couple of other nonprofits. I'm involved in our local churches, St. Mary, Kenosha Human Development Services, which is actually in Kenosha, the Open Wings Learning Community, which is a small private school for kids with special needs. So I think I'll always have a warm spot in my heart to make sure that while we grew our community and are continuing to grow the community, we have to remember all those other aspects of our lives that people love and live and use as part of their experience in the area.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.